Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my some recent Hi everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some recent reads. So today we are going to be going over the books that I read in October and November, because I never did an October wrap up because I did like nothing in November, and then November I basically binged one series and that's it. So we're going to talk about these 2 months together as kind of like a fall wrap up, just like the things that I've read recently in the fall. And I noticed while I was going through this and kind of preparing, only one book in this entire list I did not mention or talk about in a vlog. So most of the books here are things that I read for a specific reason. So when I talk about that vlog or whatever it is that comes up, I'll leave it linked above, and then I'll leave my vlog playlist down below if you'd like to check those out at some point, because like it's been a while, especially the October books. It's been a while since I've read those. So I'm gonna have more accurate thoughts, more up-to-date thoughts in those vlogs. So if you're curious and haven't watched those yet, go there. But otherwise, let's just dive into the stats. I've done them all together. Like I said, because November I basically read one series, and if I had just done like November stats, they'd all be the same. So in October and November, I read a total of 13 books combined in those 2 months, which was over a total of 4,751 pages. 3,000 of those, a little over 3,500 of those were in October, a little over 1,000 were in November. And then over those 2 months, I listened to 124 hours total, 91 and a half of those in October, 32 and a half of those in November. As far as the format of those goes, we had 7 audiobooks, 1 ebook, and 5 mixed, which means that it was an audiobook and an ebook probably. Age categories, a little more spread out than I anticipated. We had 1 middle grade, 9 YA, that's shocking to me, 1 new adult, and 2 adult books. The genres, I think, was very telling of my mood at the time because we only had 2. So we had 8 fantasy books and 5 either mystery or thriller. They probably were more mystery than thriller, to be honest. And then star ratings, pretty normal for me. We had 3 3 stars, 7 4 stars, 2 5 stars, and then we did actually have a DNF. So in October, I started the month out by doing a hyped books vlog. So of course I'll leave that linked above. And I did the entirety of the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, which is 3 books. And then there is a prequel novella that I ended up reading at the very end. I'm kind of glad that I read it at the end, just so like I could get an idea of the series. It does take place before the entire series starts. It really just kind of like explains why our main character did what she did in the first book and kind of started off the whole plot. But it, I like that I feel like you need to have read at least the first book for it to kind of hit a little bit harder. Either way, as far as ratings, I think I gave the first 2 books, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder and Good Girl, Bad Blood, I gave those both 5 stars. The third book, As Good as Dead, I gave 4.5, and then the novella Killjoy I gave 4. So this series is pretty popular. I think a lot of people know what this is about. We follow our main character, Pip, who is in high school, and she's doing a project, and it's basically, I don't quite understand, and I still don't to this day really understand like the purpose of said project, but it's kind of like a big final thesis, if you will. And so what she decides to do is to tackle this murder that takes place in the town like 5 years ago. So a girl named Andy Bell had been murdered, and it was suspected that her boyfriend killed her and then killed himself. And it never sat right with Pip. She feels like he didn't actually do it. Something just doesn't click with her. So she approaches his brother, who's actually closer to her age, his younger brother. And because they would have been, I believe, seniors at the time. And again, like I said, this was 5 years ago. And so she approaches the brother, just kind of like hoping for an interview, and then that spirals into the two of them investigating this together, because he also was like, this doesn't feel like my brother. I never really liked the way this ended. I need answers as well. Let me know what you find out. And then they end up kind of like doing this research project together. So I listened to these mostly on audiobook, and they had full cast recordings, which I love, because it's basically like, at least the first book is like her file almost. It does have some like narration stuff in between, but it's a lot of like phone interviews or multiple narrators that do multiple different parts. So that's really cool, especially when she gets into the interview stage, because she'll interview certain people and like you'll hear kind of like a conversation, and it's like a transcript in the book, whereas it's acted out in the audiobook. You've got some pictures, you've got some random things here and there. I think it's beneficial to have the audiobook and the physical book, because there are some pictures in the books that describe like things that are going on, and so like you do see those, which are helpful visually to kind of like understand what's going on. But that's how that one starts. The second book just kind of continues. She starts a podcast after the events of the first book, but she's like, I'm done with murder mystery. And then one of her best friend's brothers goes missing, and so she ends up going down that rabbit hole. And then the third one is like a circle back to the first story. So some things that weren't answered in the first book get answered in the third book. So it's very like full circle moment. And I honestly loved them. I think the first one's my favorite by far. I just really liked that story. I was really sucked into the story. It was, like I said, a full cast recording, which is like honestly a buzzword for me. And it's a multi-mixed media formatted book. Chances are I'm going to enjoy it a lot more than just like your normally formatted novel. I just think those things are fun. So it already had the building blocks for me to enjoy, but it was more of a mystery book. There were some thriller elements, especially as she got really far into her investigation. There were some like more tense scenes near the end where she was like closing in on who the murderer was. And so of course she's got like some walking in the dark at night kind of situations. And so there were some moments that I was like, oh, this is maybe not quite too much for me, but it's starting to get close to that line. And then as the series goes, I would say the second one is relatively similar to that. And the third one is more of a thriller, because it's just like, I read a lot of stuff. I talked about it in my vlog. I read a lot of stuff about the third book before going in. So a couple of things were spoiled for me, which is fine. I didn't mind that it was, but a lot of people did not like the way that the book ended, and so that after, because like it's split into two parts, that after the first part you should just stop it. But I actually really enjoyed it. I mean, it did take a little bit of a shift character development wise, but overall I actually kind of enjoyed how the series ended. I feel like I said, it went full circle. It just kind of made sense for the series. So if you want something that is very mysterious, where like you are with the characters, kind of like a detective, where like you are with them as they are solving this mystery, and I just liked some of the reveals at the end because everything came full circle, and that's just like the word, I guess, for this series. I really liked it. I didn't know what to expect going in because I'd heard some good things and I'd heard mixed things on the later books, and I wasn't really sure what to think. But I'm really glad that I read this. The next book is the only book that was not in a vlog that I haven't talked about yet, and that is Lights, and this is by Brenna Thumner. And this is the third in the Sheets series. It's a graphic novel, middle grade graphic novel series. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I think the first book was my favorite. It was called Sheets. The second one I think is called Delicates, and then this one obviously called Lights. It's perfect for fall because it takes place in a laundromat, or at least the first book takes place in a laundromat, and it talks about ghosts, and like these ghosts wear sheets, and it's like this whole like otherworldly situation. So our main character befriends this ghost named Wendell, and in the first book I think it's them becoming friends. In the second book she creates another friendship, and in this book it's kind of pairing those two together, and then like what happens when all of your hobbies revolve around the dead and you're trying to be a person, and that's kind of hard to do, to make friendships if you're like obsessed with the dead. But we also learn a lot about Wendell's backstory and history in this one, so there is a little bit of a murder mystery aspect to this book, and I did enjoy it. Bless you. Oh, bless you. So I really didn't have a lot of thoughts while reading it, and I don't have a lot of thoughts. Like, I'm looking at my notes and nothing is really like clicking for me as far as like something that stood out. I liked the story. I thought it was interesting. It had a ballet element to it, which is my backstory. I grew up around the ballet and theater, so like that was really cool to see that element play a part. And we did, like I said, get to know Wendell's story a little bit more, because like once they became a ghost, I think he kind of forgot his whole like human life, and so we got to know that a little bit more, which was very interesting. The friendship dynamics in this one stressed me out because there was a lot of tension in this one. I didn't really like that, but I understood parts of it. So I mean, it was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. It wasn't my favorite in the series. I'm not the target audience, which is totally fine. It's the final book, which is why I picked it up, because I had enjoyed the first two and I felt like I needed to finish, kind of round out the series. And while it was good, it wasn't great. And that's kind of where I think my thoughts lie. And then, of course, the rest of the books in October were all for Spookoplathon, which, of course, I will leave the vlog linked above. So that is I mean, I think a lot of people know what it's about, but it's basically like a Monopoly board. You roll die, you get prompts. So I don't remember which books fit which prompts, so go check out the vlog if you're curious. But the first book that I read for that was Wisteria by Adeline Grace. So this book got 4.5 stars, and this just proves how much I love this series. I put, I think, about a year between the first two books, which, as I've said a lot recently, does not usually equate to a good reading experience. Usually if the first book's great, then I put time between them. It does not end well for me, but it did. And I was like, all right, interesting. I did it again, where I put about a year between the first or the second and the third book. And it still was amazing. Like, this series, she's got a fan of me for sure. In the first book, we follow our main character, Signa, who, I've talked about this so many times, but basically, like, she was orphaned when she was basically an infant. And so because of that, she is bounced around from guardian to guardian, but death is very present in her life, and death is like actually a person in this world, and so like he's always around. Her guardians basically just keep dropping, and so she finally gets sent to a distant cousin who just lost his wife, has 2 kids, and his daughter is going very similarly the same way that his wife did. Now, one thing about Signa is she can see ghosts. So she sees the ghost of this cousin's wife, and she's like, I was poisoned, don't know who it was, but my daughter is basically like having the same symptoms, so you gotta figure out who it is so that she doesn't die the same way that I did. And she's like, okay. So she ends up teaming up with Death, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. This cousin's name is Blythe. That's a murder mystery in the first book. Very, very gothic vibes. Second book, we have another murder mystery of sorts. We meet another kind of fantastical creature like Death, which is Fate. And in that book, we have a dual POV from both Blythe and Signa's point of views while they're trying to figure out what's going on with that murder mystery. And in this book, it is entirely in Blythe's perspective. So I like seeing that because around the second book, Signa's story kind of like didn't come to a conclusion, but kind of came to a conclusion. So this one continued with Blythe's story. And if you are a romantasy person, you're going to enjoy this series, especially this book. While the first two definitely had that gothic vibe, this one doesn't have the gothic vibe as much, but it has the romance vibes that I really loved in the first two books, just with a different romance, which I thought was really interesting because like you start the story with one romance and you end the story with a different romance. Like you have 2 different couples throughout the story, and I really enjoyed seeing that. There's a little bit mythology-wise, if you will, in the background, and I loved the story. So the fact that this entire trilogy hit so perfectly for me is honestly amazing. Like, that does not happen very often. I loved this book. So if you want gothic, spooky stories, I cannot rave about this one enough. And like I said, while the vibe changes throughout the series, it worked perfectly, and clearly Peanut agrees. The next book is my DNF, which is A Woman in the Library, and that is by Solari Gentile. I DNF'd this about 30% of the way through. I really wanted to like this book. It was like a mystery book about a death in a library. I thought it was going to be one thing, and it was a completely different thing. But I think a couple of issues I had with this book was that what I thought it was about is not what it was about. It was described on the back as being like this library, there was a scream, they're not allowed to go anywhere because someone dies in the library. That's not what happens. Someone screams, They're not allowed to go anywhere. The bodyguard checks it out, doesn't see anything, says, all right, you're good. They find out later that a body was found. And there's these 4 people who are at the same like location, same desk area. And so like they kind of become friends. They go out, they have lunch afterwards, coffee, kind of become friends. 2 of them are writers, including our main character. And then they're kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. It looks like the person who possibly killed this person in the library is maybe after them. I don't really know. It's very confusing, but the writing is like incredibly pretentious, which makes sense for the fact that it comes from a writer. Like it's very almost dark academia vibe. Pretentious is the best way that I can describe it, but the writing drove me nuts. I honestly could not care less. I was kind of like pushing myself through it and I really didn't want to read it. So I decided that that was my cue and it was time to let it go. So I DNF'd this book and unhauled it because like I got it from a book box and in theory it sounded good, but the minute like the plot wasn't actually doing what the back said it was going to do, I was like, I have no more interest in this. So it went away. Then the next 2 books that I picked up were the entirety of the Shepard King duology, I believe, which is 1 Dark Window and 2 Twisted Crowns. I forgot what it's called for a second. I picked this one up because this was like one of the 2 books. This and Wisteria were like, these are the books that I'm going to read this fall no matter what, because I'd had this on so many lists. I heard so many good things about it. Someone told me to like have the second one ready to go, so I had both on Audible ready to go, and I picked this one up and I really enjoyed it. I gave this one 4.5, actually I gave both of them 4.5 stars. The magic system shouldn't have worked for me, but I was immediately invested in what was going on. It takes place in this world where there are cards, and the cards have like magical powers. There's a certain amount of cards that do a certain amount of things, and then like what am I trying to say? It's very confusing, but like the magic system revolves around cards, and if you have a card and then you can use the ability on the card, but there is a takeaway, like something happens to you. Like for example, there's one card that if you use it too long, like you get a headache and your nose starts to bleed. And then there's one that's like gives you incredible beauty, but like then hardens your heart, so you stop caring and feeling things. So like it you know, depends on what's going on. Also the thing with the illness, so if you are infected, then you probably have some sort of magical ability outside of the cards, and like the king and everybody in the royal family is like, no, 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 we don't like that. So if you are infected, you are like immediately hidden in the dungeons. Elspeth was infected when she was really, really young, but it is thought that she escaped it without having any sort of side effects. Except for the fact that she touched one of the cards, the nightmare card, and all of a sudden this beast-like thing now speaks to her in her mind, and she calls him the nightmare. So the plot of this book, I haven't even really gotten to the plot of this book, is that Elspeth, like I said, has this thing on her brain. And there is this rumor that if you get one of each of these cards, you make a deck, then you can go to like the woman in the woods, the queen of the woods, the witch of the woods, whatever her name is, and like basically like ask for her to get rid of this sickness and this fog, and it'll stop infecting people, and like the terribleness will go away. So she ends up like, due to circumstances, stumbling upon this group of people, including one of the princes, one of the nephews of the king, who was like in charge of the guard, who was in charge of finding infected people. And they all are trying to find this deck so that they can cure this infection. And so she ends up getting like sucked into this. I loved it. It did have a cliffhanger-ish of an ending. I did not feel like it was as cliffhanger as I expected. Like if I didn't have a second one ready to go, I would have been like, this is fine. Like I can wait a little bit. I'm satisfied with the way this has ended. But I knew myself, and I knew that if I didn't go right into the second one, I would forget the world. I would put too much time between it and then probably dislike the second book. So I said, we're not doing that. We're going to do both back to back. Very glad I did that. So I really enjoyed this series. What I liked a lot about the second one that was different than the first one is while this one has one romance at the forefront, based on how this book ends, that romance is kind of like takes a backseat in the second book. Totally makes sense. I was not upset with that. And a different romance takes a front center. I mean, it's a fantasy book, so romance are not the main point of the books. So while the romance in here is amazing and like I love it so much, based on the plot, it has to take a back seat. It cannot be the main point. And so what the author does is she kind of like takes this other romance and like fills that hole of romance in her plot with a new one, but it does not feel like that is what she is doing. It's just a couple sets of different characters take more of a center stage because of how this book ends. And so I just really liked the world. I thought I was going to be really confused with the way that I heard people explaining the cards, and I probably did not explain it well, so you guys are probably like, what is she talking about? This sounds very complicated. It's not. It is, but it is described very clearly, and as you go through the book, you're given little snippets, so it's not like all thrown at you at the same time. And so the world building and the magic system works and works well. I am so glad I read these back to back. This was very good. I don't think it was as good as I've seen some people explain it, but it still got 4.5 stars. I still am raving about it a lot, and I'm so happy I finally read it, and like I enjoyed it so much that I'm definitely keeping the first book. I can't seem to find the second book in hardback. This is a Fairy Loot edition, so I don't expect to get the second one in a Fairy Loot edition, but I can't seem to order a hardback anywhere. All I can find is paperbacks, which is kind of sad. So if I ever find a hardback of the second one, I'll probably pick it up, but yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It was surprising, and I loved that about it. The very last book that I read in October was Queen Bee by Juno Dawson, which is the prequel novella of her HMRC, Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. So I've read the first one. Actually, I'm sure it's behind me somewhere, but the first one is called Her Majesty's Royal Coven. I raved about it. I loved it. The second one, Shadow Cabinet, has come out. I have yet to read it. And then this prequel came out this year, and it is basically setting up the world. So in this world, I've talked about it 1,000 times, but in this world, there are witches and warlocks. Witches are significantly more powerful, so they're like the ruling body of the magical system in this world, which are hidden obviously from mortals, and they use what's called the HMRC, which actually in our world is the tax bureau or something in the UK, and so they like use that as a disguise. In the first book, we follow 4 women. Some stuff goes down. I've talked about it a lot. That doesn't pertain to this one. This book takes place in Tudor England because the HMRC was started by Queen Anne Boleyn. And so in this novella, we get how it started. But what was interesting is this book starts with Anne Boleyn's death, and it takes place mainly following two women who were in her coven. One of them was in love with her, and it was like her right-hand woman, and is hunting the person who they believe ratted her out and why she died. And so you've got their two perspectives, and it does go back and forth between like their present and their past, even though it's both past, but like, you know, present of her trying to figure out where this other witch is that betrayed them, and the past of showing her falling in love with Anne. And so it's very interesting. I liked the world. It set up the magic system a little bit. Like it's nowhere near the level of political that it is in the HMRC series, but it does give that like Tudor England-esque thing to it. I think I gave it 3 stars, but it's like, it was fine. Like the series didn't need it. It was okay. There wasn't anything fantastic about it. It just kind of like was a thing. So I'm glad I read it because I was interested in it. And I liked it because of the Tudor England element of it. But overall, it was not necessary for the world. And I probably should have just picked up the second book and continued on with the characters that I've already come to love, because this was just like a little extra thrown at us. All right, and then in November, I finished the entire Dragori series by Ben Alderson, which is Cloaked in Shadow, Found in Night, and Poisoned in Light. I realized I didn't show any of these books in my vlog of it because we were moving at the time and I couldn't find them. But here they are. So I'll leave that vlog linked above. These are all on my list of 30 books to read before I turn 30. So I'm trying to start a series where I read 3 to 4 books each episode or so. And I try to get through a chunk of that list. I don't think I'm going to actually get through it. I don't think there's really, because the entire like Throne of Glass series is on that list, and I don't know when that's happening. So I don't suspect to actually get through all 30 books, but I'd like to make some headway. So this is where I started. I started with an entire series. So I believe I gave these 4, 4, and 3, if I remember correctly. But basically this series, I'm not going to hold all of them up because they're heavy. This series follows our main character, Zachariah. Sorry, I really want him to be Zachariah. Zachariah. And it takes place in this world where there's only elves. And there's 3 different types of elves, and it just depends on how they bleed, who they are. And so he and a bunch of other people from like across the land are asked to come by the king. And so they come, and he's like, oh, you're coming to like celebrate my son's birthday. Thanks for coming. Enjoy the feast. And so they do, and the king's actually sprinkled in some sort of drug that like makes everyone fall asleep, except for the group of people who have this very specific gene, which is the shifting gene. So he does that to make an army of shifters that he's hoping will help stop people who are trying to like infiltrate his country and kill his son. So Zach, this dude, he cannot shift, but he does have magic that he keeps hidden, and he's been told kind of like by his family to like don't let people know that you have this magic. So he also doesn't fall asleep, but he does not have the ability to shapeshift. And so he ends up kind of meeting up with the prince, and they create this friendship, which turns into more, and he's like training Zach a little bit. So it's so much more than that. It takes on this like mythology surrounding this group of druids, and like there's these 4 things called the Dragori, which are basically like dragons in this world. It's super complicated. It just keeps going. But that's how the series starts. And what I loved about this is that this is his debut. So this just everything that I thought about this, I had to kind of like do a little caveat with like, I've read something else by this author, but at the time that I had read it, it was his most recently released book. These are also YA, and that book was adult, so like the spice levels were so different, and I really enjoyed that one. And this one I mostly enjoyed, is the best way that I can describe it. Like, it was good. I'm so glad I read it, but it didn't like, it wasn't the same level of enjoyment, I guess. And this has a lot of stereotypical YA fantasy tropes and plot devices and things like that. But the point that this author is trying to make with his work, and he said this a few places, I'm pretty sure, is that like he's writing fantasy books that he wanted to see when he was growing up. And so all of his books have a lot of queer representation, and there is a male-male love interest romance at the heart of it. So all of his books are queer. Fantastic. I loved it. And I think because of that, it makes a lot of sense, because you're going to take the things that you see that are really popular in other fantasy books and really popular in the publication world, and you're going to use that to your advantage. So while this did feel cliche at times, it worked, because like other things that have been published like this 1,000 times over. So why not this one, you know? So I don't know if I'm describing what I'm trying to say very well, but I still really liked it. By the time I got to the 3rd book, I will say I was like, I had been in this world for so long that I was like, I need a break. But the 3rd book is not short, so I was struggling to get through, which is why it got 3 stars. It's also the darkest of the 3 stories, just based on where our characters are and the plot and everything that's going on. It had elements that, if you have read ACOTAR, especially the end of the 1st book with Amarantha's Court, there's a lot of similarities vibe-wise between Amarantha's Court and the court in this one. But overall, I still am so glad I read this, because, and I'm also so glad I binged this, because even though by the time I got to the end, I was a little, I won't say I'm tired of the world, but like I wanted something a little bit different, I wouldn't have probably picked up the other 2 books anytime soon, and then I would have lost the like momentum to finish the series. So I'm so glad I read this. It's been on my TBR for a very long time, and I'm excited to see other things by this author, because like I have so many books on my TBR, like physical TBR, I'm literally looking at them, that are by this author, and I just like kept getting them, and now it's time for me to read them. So I'm glad I made a start with this one, and the world development and everything in this world was very unique, and I did enjoy the world creation that this author showed us. through this series. And that's it. That's a look at the books that I read in October and November. I hope you enjoyed. I'm hoping December is a little bit better of a month than November. I have less to do, but also more to do, just because of the holidays. And of course, as always, if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in today's video, let me know all your thoughts down below. But otherwise, I think that's it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed. And if you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links. So check all that out. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!